Hello, my name is Tom Daniel, and I'm the Grants Director of the Stanley Smith Horticultural Trust. I hope you're keeping safe and able to do useful or interesting things during these difficult times. As many of you are already aware, the Trust is making a special effort this year and next to help gardens and other horticulturally oriented organizations deal with some of the problems you have encountered as a result of closures and loss of revenue due to the pandemic. The 104 botanical gardens that have been funded by the Trust over the past 4 years and that are up to date on reporting by April 30th of this year have been notified that they will be receiving a special unsolicited grant from the Trust of $5,000 toward operating support, which they can use as they see fit and with no reporting requirements. The Trust is also making additional funds available for general operating support in the grant cycles for this year, 2020, and next year, 2021. I'll briefly mention information about that momentarily, but please see the Trust website for complete information. And here's my email address. The Trust website. My phone number, which is not on this, is on the Trust website and on a subsequent slide for any questions you may come up with. If you lose track of the website or my email, just Google Stanley Smith Horticultural Trust. Trust began in 1970 and supports education and research in ornamental horticulture, primarily at botanical gardens. And more than $20 million have been awarded by the Trust toward that mandate since its inception. Last year, the Trust awarded more than $740,000 to 46 organizations with an average grant size of $16,100. You can see those and all other awards going back to 2008 on the Trust website. There you will see the diversity of things funded. But the critical thing to be aware of is that those projects were funded not because the Trust funds those particular items, but because the proposals that were funded made a good case for how, H-O-W, not that, but how their project aligned with the Trust mandate, which is furtherance of ornamental horticulture via research and/or education. The Trust's mandate is not to fund botanical gardens, ADA compliance, testing plants for ornamental potential, greenhouse construction or renovation, digging a hole in the ground. Yet, the Trust has funded all of those things and many, many more because of the stated case made for relevance in each of those projects. I think you can see, and I've stressed this every year, it's the case for relevance to the Trust mandate that you make for whatever project you have that's going to be in your best interest. Here are the steps making a funding request to the Trust. Follow the directions on the website to set up an account. Submit a letter of intent by the 15th of July. That's a couple of weeks from when this is presented on the 25th of June. No extensions are accepted to that LOI deadline. If your LOI is approved, submit a full proposal by or on the 17th of August. And when you submit that proposal through the portal online, don't forget to press the submit button when you're done, because there are no extensions of that deadline either. And I would strongly advise you not to wait until the 17th of August to submit, because if you do come up with a problem, you don't press submit, for example, and you submit after the 17th, then unfortunately your proposal can't be considered for consideration. So don't wait until the last minute if you can. Submit at least on the 15th or 16th or 14th before the 17th. It's not a requirement, but believe me, it might save you some grief. You will receive notification either one way or the other, either you're funded or not funded, and funds, if you are funded, from the trustees in late November or early December of this year. Funds that are awarded this year are to be used in the following year, which is 2021. Please do not use funds retroactively for expenses you had in 2020 on a 2020 grant, because those funds are to be used in the following calendar year, and it creates all kinds of problems for both the Trust and for you if you retroactively use funds. And we don't want to have to have funds returned and all kinds of other things. So that's when they're to be used. Also, follow the instructions received with your award regarding reporting to complete your grant when all of the funds have been expended. That's when you can submit a final report through the portal online when all of the funds have been expended. If you don't expend them all by the end of next year, you can request a no-cost extension, and that's no problem. You can get your report. If you get your reporting in on time with that extension, you'll be fully up to date. Some people take 10 years to complete an award, and I don't have a problem with that. They just aren't eligible for those intervening 10 years, and I think some organizations have a problem with that. The proposal itself consists of description of your organization. And if your organization is a botanical garden, please flaunt that. Don't skimp. The trust is interested in your plants, your plantings, your horticulture, your horticultural activities, all of those things. I love that gardens do all kinds of wonderful things to generate revenues, such as wine tasting, concerts, parties, dog days, you name it, and they're all wonderful. But if that's the only way you describe your organization, you're not really making a good alignment with what the trust is all about. The better you can align your trust with the mandate, the better off you're going to be. And then making your project align with what you're doing horticulturally is going to work out very nicely. So don't skimp on describing your plants, plantings, horticultural activities. Description of the project. Good description of your project. You want to justify it. You want to give all the information you can about it, and that will be wonderful. And then a statement on how you feel your project is relevant to the trust's mandate. If you've provided a really good description of your organization, it talks all about the wonderful horticultural things you do, this should be a very easy step, because anything you can relate your project to in terms of all of those things you do, you're making a case. An itemized budget, no capital campaigns except as I will discuss in just a second, and no indirect costs are permitted for funding. Now, people often have capital campaigns. You may have a capital campaign for $100,000 or $1 million, and we will not contribute toward a capital campaign. However, if you can pull an item that's within the funding limits of the trust out of that campaign that you plan to do in 2021, irrespective of whether you're going to get any more money in your capital campaign or not, then you can make that a separate project to the trust. So if you have a $100,000 campaign and you ask the trust for $20,000 toward that campaign, you're not going to get it. If you have an item in your campaign that costs $20,000 and you can make a case for that as how it's relevant to the trust, make that a project and provide a budget for that item. You can give us the whole campaign budget if you want, but specify that item in that budget is what you're requesting funds for, and then you'll be fine. You have an itemized budget that's about your project. Provide a statement on partial funding. A lot of people don't think this is very serious, and my answer is always that it can only help you to provide a statement on partial funding. Yes, partial funding would be useful. If there are any limits on below what amount it wouldn't be useful, you can indicate that. If you say no partial funding would not be useful, if you have a great proposal, no problem, you're going to get full funding. If your proposal is not deemed worthy of full funding and you can only take full funding, then chances are you won't get an award. Some people think if I put partial funding, that's what I'm going to get. That's not the case at all. If you have a great proposal, you're going to get full funding. If your proposal is not as competitive, you may get partial funding only. And so be aware of that and don't skimp on providing a statement here. Some people just leave this blank. That hurts them unless they have an excellent proposal and there's no question about partial funding, then they get full funding. And the required attachments. These are a cover letter and the appropriate financial documents, which usually consist of an IRS 990 and your audit if you've had one. And if you haven't had an audit, a signed financial statement from someone at your organization. Then optional attachments, whatever you feel would be useful in making a case for your proposal and or organization. Some people, this is critical for because their statement of their description of their organization is not good, their statement on relevance is not good, and yet the things they attach make those cases beautifully, and I take those as their statements on their organization and their statement on relevance. If you have a book or a large magazine or a big brochure that you want to attach, it can take my computer sometimes 30 minutes to open a very large document, and that may be 30 minutes lost to you. So if you have something that's more than, say, 20 megabytes that you want to attach, be better off sending a printed copy to the trust by the 17th of August deadline, and it will get to me and I will use that. And you can mention that you've sent that in your proposal, and that should be fine. Things not to do. This is almost as important as the things to do. Don't refer to your website for information requested. If you've got great information on your website, then that's great. You've got a source for the information you're going to put in the proposal. If you refer me to the website to get this information, you're out of luck, because chances are I'm not going to go to your website. Unless you have a proposal that's about your website, and then I'll definitely be looking at your website, so give me the URL. Don't provide perfunctory description of your garden. I already mentioned this. If you have a garden and you have plants and you have anything horticultural, this is the time to flaunt it. Don't give me a perfunctory description. Yes, we have wonderful plantings and we have wonderful programs. That doesn't go anywhere. Do not assume relevance because you're a garden. Being a garden alone does not make you relevant to furthering ornamental horticulture. You have to tell me proactively what you're doing regarding ornamental horticulture. Do not include indirect costs, staff salaries, or general annual operating costs, except as I will discuss in just a minute here, in your budget. Don't request more than is needed for your project. In other words, don't do any major rounding up. If you have a $15,000 project and you figure, well, we can request 20, so let's throw in an intern or something along with this. That often kills many very good proposals. And we may choose to fund the lesser of your items that you request only when you do that. If you're requesting an intern, that's a major project in itself and takes a lot of time and energy to justify and provide information about that. So request what you need, especially this year when there'll be a lot of requests. You'll be able to request some general operating support. This is not a time to try to pad your budget or fill out as much as you think you can get. Everybody has needs this year. Do not leave questions or blanks unanswered. For example, the statements on partial funding and relevance, you do not want to leave those unanswered. This information is copied directly from the website about the Trust's response to the pandemic for 2020 and 2021. I would ask that you refer to it here, or refer to it there on the website at your leisure to fully digest it, and I'll briefly explain it here. So please listen now and read later. It's the Trust's response to the pandemic and is in addition to the regular grant-making cycles. I've already discussed the COVID response grants. Messages have gone out to those organizations to confirm their correct address for checks or other methods of payments. It's this second item that I really want to focus on. This year, the Trust will fund general operating support. That's something it usually doesn't fund because of the general need. And so requests for general operating support in amounts up to $10,000 from organizations whose activities normally are well aligned with the Trust interests. That means you make a case for your organization's relevance to the Trust's mandate here. That's critical. If you can do that, then an application for general operating support may comprise the entire amount requested, up to $10,000, or it may be a supplement to a request for project-based funding. The policy will be in effect both in 2020 and 2021, so that organizations not eligible to apply this year will have the opportunity to benefit from this next year. For the Trust usual guidelines, the maximum grant awarded by the Trust is $25,000. However, grants normally do not exceed $20,000, and I would expect this year, with so many requests expected, that there wouldn't be very many that went all the way to $25,000. but it gives you the opportunity of getting $10,000 for general operating support, and then on top of that, another potentially $15,000 for a project. Now, both of those things you have to relate to the trust's relevance. You can't just say, we're a botanical garden, we need operating support, therefore here's a request for $10,000. You've got to provide what you do that's relevant to the trust's mandate for that and for a project. Finally, there'll be some flexibility regarding reporting guidelines for those projects that are delayed as a result of the pandemic. Current grantees should contact me about that, and we'll see what flexibility we can provide, and we should be able to come to some agreement that works for everybody. So if there are questions, you can ask me here at the conference via the method to ask questions. You can email me. Here's my email address. You can call me. This is my work number, but I'm at home, and this is my phone right here on my head, and I'm on Pacific time. I plug this phone in about 10 a.m. Pacific time. So if you try calling Eastern time at 8 o'clock and it's 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock here in the morning, you will not get me. And you can also see answers to common questions on the Trust website, which you now have seen many times.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Beck, Director of Programs and Education at the American Public Gardens Association.
Hello.
Here I actually am. Hi, Tom. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you, Sarah. It's good to be here. Hello, everyone. I see, gosh, 102 people out there somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. We're so thrilled to have you. I know there are a lot of questions people have. Your funding has just been such a great savior to so many gardens recently in very dire situations. I'd like to ask you, it's kind of a fun question. I know people are often asking us, what is a public garden? And I'm sure you're often hearing, what is ornamental horticulture?
That's true, and we discussed this on the website, but that's the question I get. What do you mean by ornamental horticulture? And different people may mean different things. What the trust means is horticulture for pleasure, for enjoyment. It's not horticulture for agricultural purposes. It's not growing plants to solve social issues or human health issues. Those are wonderful things, but that's just not, those aren't things that the trust will fund. It's the horticulture for enjoyment, for pleasure, for beauty that gardens have, and it's wonderful. They inspire people with this, and it's great, and that's what the funds were given to support. And so it's our job as trustees of the Stanley Smith Horticultural Trust to make sure that that mandate is kept. And so we don't fund agriculture, or we don't fund the floriculture industry, which is a wonderful thing, but we do not fund that. So that's what we mean by ornamental horticulture. And we discuss what botany is, what agriculture is, what ornamental horticulture is on the website. So if you do have questions, you can check that out. If I'm not very clear, there really is good information on the Trust website.
We just had a question from someone who said, if their garden received a relief check from the Trust recently, are they still permitted to apply for both grant opportunities this year with the Trust?
If they're otherwise eligible this year, which means they didn't get an award last year from the Trust, indeed they are. And they will be, if they aren't eligible this year because they got an award last year, they can apply for operational support next year. Because we now have, it's every other, if you get an award, you have to wait a year before you get another award from the Trust. But the $5,000 that went to 104 gardens this year as unsolicited grants that the Trust made, those are done, and they don't have any impact on your eligibility for being eligible this year or next. But other things may come into play. For example, if you have an award from 2010 that you've never reported on, you're not eligible this year because we've already passed the reporting deadline for this year. So it's always good to keep up with reporting, to stay eligible. It certainly helped 104 organizations this year who got an unsolicited award from the Trust. And
that's fantastic.
That the money that went to that will not impact the amount of money available for this year. We're using the normal amount of money that we have, maybe even a little more It's 5% of the trust's endowment. But what we did was we dug into the endowment to help gardens, because this is a very special time. Gardens needed help, and we felt this was the least we could do, even if it means over the next few years a drop in our endowment. We figured gardens really needed this, and so
That's a
why not?
really valuable gesture. I know the gardens appreciate that you made that decision.
And all the trustees were fully behind this. Even
That's
me,
really
who's a
incredible.
cheapskate. So.
You just mentioned the term operational support. Can you just elaborate on what you mean by that?
Yeah, general operating support. It's basically your annual operating budget. There are usually things in there like your salaries for your staff, purchases you have to make every year, commitments you have. Normally, the trust doesn't fund those. In some circumstances, we will fund that in a normal year, but we felt this year, because of closures and other things, that people need help with general operating support. And so that's why we made the $5,000 payments, and why in this year's grant cycle, you can request up to $10,000 for general operating support, which when you report, you do have to say that you used it, and maybe you used it on salaries. Whatever you used it for, though, is fine for general operating support. However, you can't just come to the trust and say, gosh, we need general operating support, so we're requesting $10,000. You better talk about how your organization and what you do with your staff and whatever are relevant to furthering ornamental horticulture at your organization. In other words, what are the things your organization does relevant to ornamental horticulture through research and or education? And as I mentioned on the thing, dog days and wine tasting, great things to do. I love that gardens do those. One of the things that draws me into gardens. But if that's all you can tell me about horticulture at your garden, you're not doing yourself a big favor. I hope that's clear.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
I think a number of people have been asking some more clarifying questions about the ornamental horticulture. And someone asked if a green roof was considered ornamental horticulture.
Well, it depends on the plants you put on the roof. A green roof in itself is not ornamental horticulture. But if you can relate having a green roof or a living wall or an ornamental vegetable garden to your efforts in furthering ornamental horticulture, then absolutely. There really is almost nothing I can think of that you couldn't request, as long as you can relate that to ornamental horticulture. The example I've used year after year is digging a hole in the ground. And I'm not being facetious with that. We've funded digging a hole in the ground twice in the last, I guess it's 4 years now, paying for digging a hole in the ground, not because the trust funds holes in the ground, but because they've related how digging that hole in the ground, or why digging that hole in the ground, is going to help with something they're doing relevant to the trust mandate, furthering ornamental horticulture through research or education. So if you can make a case for digging a hole in the ground, certainly you can make a case for most other things. The things to think about are, what does your organization do relative to ornamental horticulture? You want to be really clear, and it's a time to make your garden shine, because everything I'm going to know about your garden comes from what you put in your proposal. And so tell me all about those wonderful things you do in ornamental horticulture, and whatever you need that you can relate to that, that's certainly fair game, especially this year and next.
That's great. We have time for one more quick question.
Okay.
I've got one asking about revenue generation, which you had mentioned. Do you prefer this is coming from a garden, do you prefer for us to share that, or that you'd rather we focus on collections and horticulture activities?
In terms of getting either operational support or a project related to that? Is that the question?
I don't see a clarification.
Okay.
It just
yeah,
mentioned, I think it's really about whether revenue generation should be mentioned in an application, it sounds like.
Revenue generation. Well, we've supported projects that are related to revenue generation that are going to specifically support something you're doing in ornamental horticulture. Not just general revenue generation is something that all gardens do. So if you're going to ask for that, you'd certainly want to talk about all the wonderful things your garden does that you're using that revenue for that relate to the trust. To go back to the question I first interpreted as whether we prefer or operational support versus a project, we don't care. It's what you need. If you need both, then you have an opportunity to go for both this year. But you certainly, if you feel you can't do any projects because of limitations, you certainly have an opportunity to get some operational support.
Great.
There are questions that have come up here, and I will go through and try to answer these by writing. And therefore, hopefully, if you have a question up here that I haven't seen, I will be able to answer that. And Sarah can tell you how you can
That's
get that
right. Yeah,
answer.
we will have this recording will hold all of the questions you've submitted, and there is a discussion platform for the conference, which is the same platform that you probably entered this session from, and we'll be able to post those responses a little bit later when Tom has a chance. So thank you again so much, Tom Daniel from the Stanley Smith Horticultural Trust. Thank you so much for all that you do and
Thank
for
you,
today's
APGA.
session.
Thank you, APGA, and all the people who are attending out there. I hope you have a wonderful conference. I'll be attending some of the sessions too.
Wonderful, thank you. And remember that the website for the trust is smithht.org. Today's opening reception will begin at, since we're here in Pacific time, 1:30 Pacific time and 4:30 p.m. Eastern time. And you can find that link on the main conference schedule pages when you click live sessions. From there, opening reception, click join session. Thanks to BHS Insurance for making this opening day free to all our members. And thank you all again for being part of our first ever virtual conference. Thanks so much.
Well done.